For those of you unfamiliar, the MAGA communist movement is starting to take the internet by storm. It's starting to take Twitter by storm because it's been trending for like the past 3 days. And in a curious mind, that would provoke a lot of questions. MAGA and communism combining seems anachronistic. But the problem is that not everyone has a curious mind. Not everyone is just willing to sit down and humble themselves and ask questions like, maybe there's something here I don't already know. Let's face it, people love their echo chambers. But despite all the independent thinkers and all these independent-minded political influencers, this country still has yet to have an independent political third party or political force in general. And the ideological gatekeepers like Styxhexenhammer benefit from that fact. They benefit from the fact that entire audiences get to be pigeonholed into these either leftist or right-wing focus groups that are a sure and guaranteed source of building their own brands. They don't have to risk exploring new ideas because doing that would fall under the risk of offending people you didn't know you were going to offend before. For nearly half a decade, these political content creators have created entire personas and brands based off of fringe political ideologies with no results to show for it. At the end of the day, American politics is still 100% controlled by the same globalist elites. We, those of us on the bottom, have no say in any of it. So you could see why these influencers like Styxhexenhammer want and have a vested interest in trying to prevent the coming and inevitable political realignment that the American masses are starting to wake up to. A political realignment which is going to shift from the typical leftist versus rightist dichotomy to a dichotomy between those who are on the bottom and those who are on the top. Now recently, Styx made a video titled, "No, MAGA Communism Does Not Exist," where he basically went on this 9-minute spiel, basically vomiting out his complete ignorance and prejudice about the ideas of communism. And fair enough, maybe he genuinely is uneducated. And I want him to give him a chance to prove that, right? So I sent people to ask him to debate me about it. Let's have a debate or a discussion where you can give me the opportunity to explain where I'm coming from as the originator of the MAGA communist meme, at least from the very beginning. And that way, I can give you the benefit of the doubt because I don't like to just antagonize people for no reason. But for someone who dedicated a 9-minute video to debunking a ideology or a movement that originated in this community, Styx has shown an unwillingness to engage with the actual thinking that's behind it. He said in a really dismissive and arrogant way that he's not going to debate me because I don't have enough clout, because he has 500,000 subscribers and I only have 20,000. Well, clearly the meme had enough clout for you to make a video about it. And I imagine you're going to be having to make more videos about this topic because MAGA communism isn't going anywhere. We are full steam ahead, and it's only growing. We're getting a lot of people in our ranks, a lot of people interested in the ideas, a lot of people fully on board with the initiative and the idea. So I may not have enough clout, Styx, but clearly my influence has a far greater reach than you're willing to accept. With that being said, since he won't debate me, he leaves me no choice but to absolutely BTFO his dumb little 9-minute video about why MAGA communism doesn't exist. Let's begin.
Alright everyone, there's some astroturfing going on and a little bit of economic gaslighting, I suppose. The other day, communists were trying to get MAGA communism trending, and I can't believe that I have to actually explain why this is a poor idea and can't possibly work. And there was a Substack fucking article on RCP that was trying to explain how actually it made sense, and I'd like to debunk a few things here. No, MAGA communism cannot exist and does not exist. It's a co-opting attempt by the far left on MAGA, and it's...
So first of all, you're wrong right off the bat. This isn't a co-opting by the far left, at least if you're going to define that based on its reality. We aren't part of the American left in any capacity. So where would we even be coming from to co-opt the MAGA movement to begin with? Many of the infrared community members actually have family who are MAGA. They actually live in MAGA counties and MAGA communities. And they're just as much entitled to being part of the MAGA movement as anyone else. Styx, you're like this Luciferian pagan Satanist. You have nothing in common with the average MAGA supporter and MAGA person, most of whom are devout Christians and people of faith. So where the hell are you coming from with this gatekeeping about how we have to be co-opting the MAGA movement to be pushing new ideas within it?
Effort to make MAGA look like it's frenetic and insane by associating it with communism, which, the vast majority of humans in this world understand is not a working system. It's failed.
Okay, well, first of all, I can grant you the fact that most Americans are hostile to communism, so it might seem like this is like a Democrat astroturfing attempt to discredit MAGA. But the truth is, the MAGA communism meme is twofold. On the one hand, we actually think communism is what's going to turbocharge the MAGA movement into a powerhouse of the American working class, which we think is the only path to resisting and defeating the globalists. And on the other hand, it's also an attempt to educate people who are knee-deep in all these Cold War prejudices about what communism is into ideas they haven't been exposed to before.
It's a utopian ideology like some others, and it's non-working. There is never going to be a successful implementation of anything resembling communism. It's been tried over and over for a century now. It always fails and usually leads to genocides. This is the inevitable end result of...
Okay, so A, communism is the exact opposite of a utopian ideology. You'd know that if you actually read communist literature. Secondly, communism has worked almost every single time, at least in the major countries within which it was implemented. It worked in China and it worked in the Soviet Union. The question is, what did it work for? Its goals were to basically create a primary industrial economic sphere, which is, mind you, something that the majority of countries today are unable to do, even with all of the IMF loans and subsidies they get from the imperialist and globalist governments. So you have to bear in mind what the goals were. The goals weren't to give everyone iPhones and to create a completely luxurious society. The goal was pretty baseline, humble, and as far as those goals were concerned, they were able to achieve them. And even above and beyond that, China has proved that it can implement communism in a way that has all of the dynamism and all of the material wealth befitting and necessary for a people in the modern age.
Even if it didn't have an economically centralized policy. But it tends to do so because of the nature of authoritarianism.
I mean, this is just pure nonsense, okay? Communist states in history were just about as centralized as any other state corresponding to them. The point isn't about centralization. The point is actually about the system of distribution, which was not able to actually adjust to the information age and to the demands for light industry consumer goods by the populations living under the Soviet type of communist system. But mind you, the Soviet communist system isn't the only type. There's something called socialism with Chinese characteristics. That's the Chinese version of communism, which is vastly different from the Soviet kind. And obviously, an American version of communism would also be different than both of them.
MAGA doesn't need any allies within the far left. The idea that MAGA is failing somehow is completely wrong. The MAGA...
So first of all, MAGA may not need any allies in the left, but if it wants to be an independent political movement that's not going to be co-opted and extinguished by the swamp monsters that still dominate the Republican Party, it definitely needs new ideas. And you're saying that the MAGA movement isn't failing. Well, the movement isn't failing in terms of the enthusiasm it commands among the millions of supporters, but on a political level, it is failing. It's been infiltrated by the same rhino Republicans, neoconservatives, and swamp monsters that tried to destroy and subvert the MAGA movement from day one.
At the local and state level, it's a wall of MAGA. At the federal level, after the midterms, it's likely to become a wall of MAGA. We're talking about nigh on 100 House seats.
So I'm not exactly sure where you're getting this idea of a wall of MAGA from. Because the grand majority of these Republicans that are being elected to Congress, at least, and the Senate, are still the same fucking Republicans that preceded Trump's election in 2016. Yeah, they may be looking like they're kissing Trump's ass right now, but that's just because they're trying to pander to the electorate who are loyal to Trump alone. In reality, these people are going to destroy, extinguish, and bury the MAGA movement the first opportunity that they get. Why? Because they're controlled and they're in bed with the exact same globalist forces that control the Democratic Party.
They're dancing to the same tune at this point to try to save their careers. This is why Ted Cruz...
Yeah, so that's the majority of the Republican Party right now. Believe it or not, they're not actual populists who come from the soil of the people. They're swamp monsters. And if they're dancing to the tune of MAGA, it's only because of circumstance. Now, if this MAGA movement is actually going to face its enemies in the globalist elites, how is it going to be commanded and led by people who aren't even loyal to it at the most fundamental level? At the first sign of trouble, the whole thing's going to break and collapse if it's going to be left in the hands of these Republican politicians.
Even the legacy media, which pounds the idea of Make America Great Again constantly as though it was some sort of extremist event, even they throttle back at times because they realize that the actual policies put forth by Donald Trump and others are popular.
Yeah, but if you can't see that the mainstream media like CNN is trying to pander to MAGA people now and only now because they're trying to regain the people's trust in institutions and media outlets that they've long turned their back on, you're on a whole different level of naivety than I can even probably respond to. Just open your eyes. They're not doing it just because the ideas are popular. They're doing it because they're trying to lead people like sheep to the slaughter. Oh yeah, trust us. We're CNN. We're understanding. We're not going to go too hard on the MAGA people. That way we can earn your trust and we can betray you like the establishment has always done throughout the history of this country.
They're collapsing. They're having big problems right now.
Yeah, I really think you're underestimating the extent to which wedge issues like abortion probably are going to at least make somewhat of a difference in the upcoming midterm elections. Now, I don't want the Democrats to win as much as the next guy, but I really think you're underestimating the extent to which these false socio-cultural polarizations that have been thrusted upon the American people can do significant damage to the MAGA movement.
It's already eroding the underpinnings of the old neocon, pro-war, stupid movements of the Republican Party.
Wait, based on what? All of the neocons are still in power. All of the Republican policies to give aid to Ukraine and send money to Ukraine, all that dumb bullshit, and to go to war with China, that's all still there. Even Ron DeSantis, who is heralded by all these people as some kind of populist, isn't. He's actually fully on board with the neocon agenda and getting involved with more foreign intervention. So where are you getting that information from? You're getting that information from the internet and the jibber-jabber that goes on the internet. It doesn't actually reflect what's going on politically. These same neocons are still in power and still control the Republican Party. And as a matter of fact, these are the same people who made President Trump get involved in foreign interventions and conflicts he otherwise wouldn't have. How do I know that? Because on the campaign trail, he made it very clear that he didn't want to. But he did just because of the power of these neoconservatives that he had to compromise with. I mean, to add insult to injury, figures like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who admittedly are skeptical of the interventionist agenda and do represent probably the most authentic voice of the MAGA movement right now, she's ostracized. She's marginalized. The majority of the Republican leadership doesn't like her.
The idea that, well, we have different ideologies, but we're united by a common concept of destroying the current system is bullshit. What's the point of destroying the current system to implement one that's worse, namely communism? Hell, I would take a neoliberal government over a communist one. At least
Epstein can still bring children to his island to molest. I mean, what a stupid point, dude. For the record, what you're actually telling your audience right now is that you don't trust people. Because we communists are not going to be implementing any system, certainly not at the expense of the grand majority, without actually being able to persuade and convince people that our ideas are good. And the only way we're going to be able to do things like that is if we're able to debate about it. Now, if you're actually confident in your position that communism is wrong, you should have nothing to worry about because you'll be effective in persuading the majority of the MAGA people. But you have so little faith in the American people and in the MAGA movement that you're basically admitting that if our ideas were even to be given a platform, the masses of MAGA people would just instantaneously join us, and your ideas would have no chance whatsoever in being able to compete with ours. If you actually think communism is so bad that it's worth allying with neoliberals over, the very least you can do is prove it to the masses and prove it to your audience. Prove to your audience that our ideas are wrong. Actually make arguments in a live debate where I can actually respond to you. Clearly, you're not confident enough in your own ideas if you're not willing to do that.
Be unfair to the bourgeois middle class that those communists really want to eradicate literally by shooting people. Yeah,
That was never true in the entire history of communism. Every time there was political violence in the history of communism, it wasn't considered a goal of the movement. It was considered a tragical byproduct of a civil war or some kind of broader political conflict. Nobody wants to shoot the bourgeoisie, and certainly nobody wants to do that to the middle class. It's going to be the working class of America, who sometimes are called the middle class, although clearly that isn't the case anymore. That's going to be the base of an American communism. Why would we want to shoot the people who are the only ones who are going to bring American communism to power? We don't want to shoot people because they're part of the bourgeoisie or they're part of the middle class. We just want a government that doesn't serve the bourgeoisie. We want a government that serves the American worker and serves the American people by extension at large.
yeah, I'd prefer neoliberalism over communism, and that's going some considering my...
Yeah, I mean, I don't find that particularly surprising because based on the lifestyle you advocate to your audience, based on the Satanism and the paganism you've adopted, you pretty much have the same ideology as the neoliberal elites themselves. Do you think Epstein is more likely to agree with like a Christian conservative communist from Russia than someone like you? Of course, you have more in common with the neoliberal elites just in terms of your own personal ideology.
As I pointed out, I believe this to be an astroturf. This is a deliberate attempt to denigrate populism by associating it with an extremist movement that the vast majority of people don't like. And I think that...
I mean, what a profoundly ignorant thing to say. I've always been a consistent populist since the very beginning of starting this channel, along with the other infrared showrunners. And the idea that it's being astroturfed to denigrate populism or denigrate MAGA is just baseless and unfounded. Yeah, I'm sure for the majority of people in America, communism is scary. The point isn't to manipulate the MAGA movement from without. The point is to introduce ideas to the MAGA movement that we think are going to be necessary or at least useful in being able to prevent an otherwise inevitable calamity and disaster that's awaiting it from the neoliberal and globalist elites. I think you're severely underestimating the extent to which the deep state has planned to deal with the MAGA movement. For as long as the MAGA movement is going to be wedded to the neoliberal finance capital that controls American politics, the MAGA movement is doomed either to co-option or outright destruction.
Part of it is to try to convince the generally soft, never-Trumper neocon crowd, so Bush Republicans, McCain Republicans, people of that kind of boomerism, to not support, to vote Democrat instead of voting for...
Yeah, I mean, those people are a pretty negligible minority. And if the MAGA movement is going to be relying on those segments of society, maybe you should rethink your entire strategy to begin with.
I can't believe that I even have to fucking explain this to people. Yeah, communism is incommensurate with an actual pro-worker movement. Communism is incommensurate with the concept of the nation state. Well...
Okay, both things that are just patently false. Communism is incommensurate with a pro-worker movement. But the vast majority of pro-worker movements in history at least had some communist involvement in them. And the idea that communism is incommensurate with the nation state is just completely baseless. Some of the most profusely patriotic countries in the world, if not the most patriotic countries in the world, have been communist states. It's neoliberalism that's eroding the foundations of nations, countries, and state sovereignty. It's not for nothing that there's an old saying in Eastern Europe which goes something like, communists have always been the true patriots. Marx and Engels even explicitly outline in the Communist Manifesto that the class struggle is national in form. Furthermore, the writings of J.V. Stalin make it patently clear that the nation is an objective reality, which no, communists don't want to abolish.
Of course, they want to destroy the United States.
Then why were we ostracized by the entire left precisely for defending the history of the United States and the Republic at the expense of the British Empire? Why have we been at the fore of combating lies like the 1619 Project, which is trying to denigrate the very foundations of the United States Republic and say that the British Crown and the British Empire were actually woke and progressive and wanted to abolish slavery? You don't know what you're talking about. You're talking from a place of ignorance and prejudice. It just makes you sound stupid in front of your 500,000 subscribers.
Lose. That's the only way you can be useful in life. There's no other purpose to communists and socialists anyway.
Yeah, communists are only good for losing, which is why communists defeated Nazi Germany and won the Second World War, and it's also why China has won the global economy by becoming the supreme economic power of the world.
The idea that, by the way, anyone in MAGA is going to get taken in by this, despite every other ideological platform possible to conceive of, is a complete disagreement with communism. It is asinine. I don't think that you're changing...
Well, okay, you can call it asinine, but the facts disagree with you. There are plenty of people in my community alone who come from MAGA backgrounds who are at the minimum sympathetic with communist ideas and at the maximum have fully become communists themselves.
Why don't you just go off and beat off to tanky footage again? Why don't you go and beat off to General Mao? I'm sure he would appreciate it too.
Why don't you go beat off to more Luciferian paganism that will always, and I can guarantee you this much, be antithetical to everything the working class people of the MAGA movement stand for? Why don't you go make more apologia for Epstein's Island and these billionaires who are pedophiles and sacrificing and molesting children, but that's okay because at least some people get to benefit from the system? What a stupid fucking thing to say.
By the way, you'd be found guilty of parasitism under the Soviet Union. It'd be in a fucking gulag, so yeah, enjoy.
I think that's kind of projection. I think a drug addict, Satanist, loser, hippie would probably be found guilty of parasitism. And by the way, the Soviets aren't going to throw you in a gulag for something like that, but they probably would have made you get a real fucking job instead of LARPing as some Aleister Crowley acolyte on the fucking internet.
I'm sure that when the commie revolution, that will never actually happen.
If it's never going to happen, why are you so fucking scared? Why do you need to make a video to debunk MAGA communism if this is a completely harmless trend that's never going to amount to anything?
I'm sure that you, with absolutely no real-world skills, the inability to grow a plant...
Why don't you grow a fucking chin, dude?
I'm sure you will not be in a gulag or on a collective farm. You will be a local official, and you'll have a nice shiny uniform and a bunch of zinc pins.
Or maybe we would just be ordinary workers, like the majority of actual people in the United States, getting by. Maybe the whole point of communism is actually about, instead of creating a system that's tailored around these unrealistic expectations, we should at least have a system that works for the majority of people. At the end of the day, majority of people are going to be having normal, regular jobs. As far as we're concerned, instead of those jobs being bullshit jobs that don't produce any wealth, the normal jobs that people should have are real, manufacturing, industrial, real jobs that actually alter and transform the world around us in some kind of way. That's what communists actually believe in.
And it's usually, in retrospect, led by government factions within the neolib neocon dichotomy.
Yeah, you got me. I'm a government faction working for the neolibs or the neocons. How about you're actually just exposed to an idea that you weren't before, and that you should actually just humble yourself to the fact that either you have more reading to do and more education to do, or you could actually debate me in front of your audience instead of bluffing, if you're so confident that we're wrong about this whole thing. In conclusion, I find it pretty baffling that someone who's so grotesque and abhorrent to the basic sensibilities of the majority of working Americans like Styx tries to gatekeep the MAGA movement as though he's some kind of legitimate leader or representative of it. In reality, the MAGA movement is an open movement of people aligned against the globalist elites and the globalist ruling class, and there should be room for people to share their ideas, whether you agree with them or not. There should be discussion and debate about which ideas are going to bring this thing forward. I'm sure a lot of people disagree with where I'm coming from, but to say that you're not going to debate me just because I don't have enough clout, only then to create all of these strawmans and false arguments against where I'm coming from, really speaks poorly on your character as far as your level of honesty and sincerity about your own ideas is concerned.